Oh my God, Mika, hands off my chocolate. What are you doing?
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm just in such a habit of putting my chocolate over there.
Yeah, but that's my chocolate.
Yeah, I didn't think about it. I'm sorry.
No. That will not do. That will not do. Okay? I think we're going to have to work on this chocolate stealing habit.
Yeah, I need better habits.
Yeah. I think today's book should give us all the miraculous tips to make this no longer a habit. But I think we're going to need some help discussing this, don't you?
I think so, yeah.
Hey, Tash, can you help us?
Absolutely. Happy to help.
Awesome.
This is great.
All right. Let's break some habits. Welcome to Thriving Between the Lines, the podcast that examines personal development books through the lens of intersectionality, making self-help content more accessible and relatable. I'm life coach and Bad Habits Factory, Leslie Crudup Villa Garcia.
And I'm Mika, a neurospicy special sauce.
And together, we're not just reading between the lines, we're thriving between the lines. All right, and today, as usual, we're coming to you from Meanjin, or Brisbane in Australia, land of the Yagara and Turrbal people, where sovereignty has never been ceded and it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. And we've got a guest today, don't we, Mika?
That's right, Leslie.
Someone very special joining us via Zoom. Who is it?
We have Tash.
Tash! How you doing?
Hello.
How you going?
I'm great, thank you. I'm joining you from the unceded lands of the Gubbi Gubbi and Jinnabara people today. I am on the Sunshine Coast hinterland in Montville.
Fantastic.
Thank you. And you're our first remote guest as well.
An honour.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for doing this for me.
Yeah, we really wanted to come up to that area and just,
Lives got in the way.
call it a business trip, but yeah,
Maybe next time.
maybe next time. So Tash, if you wouldn't mind, tell us a little bit about yourself. What are your pronouns? Anything you want us to know about how you identify? And what makes you so wonderful?
Thank you. Well, so I'm Tash Corbin. My pronouns, I use she, her, and they, them pronouns. And I am a business mentor, and I specialize in helping people with lean business as well as consent-based marketing, which is very important to me. And the way that I describe what I do is that I'm helping to get more financial wealth and power, economic power, into the hands of marginalised people, because when we have that, we change the world.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
So does that mean you're going to like Venmo me some money?
Oh, yeah. Yep. We could do that.
See, you're off the hook because we don't have Venmo in
No,
Australia.
we really don't. And one of the things that I really focus on is helping people to escape like corporate structures or patriarchal structures in the way that they generate income. So I work on business strategy and marketing and those sorts of things. So not only can I Venmo you some money, I can teach you how to make more money on your own as well with your amazing services. And so that it's, really helping people to make money in a way that is meaningful to them, but doesn't require them to kind of bend themselves in knots and subscribe to someone else's ideas of what looks like a disciplined person or what's a productive person, those sorts of things.
Beat those executive function traps
Yes.
that have put so many of us neurodivergent people off of business.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Like, so many great ideas. Then I look at the paperwork and the tax and I just go, oh no, I'd rather be poor.
Yeah.
I am also diagnosed ADHD, so I identify as neurodivergent. So I definitely feel you on a few of those things, Makeup.
Oh, I'm very interested to hear some of your input on this then.
I think you're going to need to get like real close to the thing just because it's a bit echoey in here. Not that close, you pervert.
I'm. Here we go. I'll just
that's better.
stick it right there.
Okay.
Stick it right in my face. Okay, we're good.
I heard that. Okay, anyway. Yeah, and it's great hearing you say that because that's one of the things that I appreciate about you as a business mentor, as a business expert, because you've also created this awesome online community where you speak very openly about the need to respect people from marginalized communities. And I think, and that's something, especially on Facebook with Facebook groups and stuff, there's so many different business communities that I've just given up on because it's just the same generic garbage being pumped out over and over and over again that really only applies to people with a lot of privilege a lot of times. And it can be really shaming as well when you have any sort of different perspective.
Hustle and burnout.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The big thing for me with that Facebook community is that the inception of that community came from marginalization, in that I was part of other Facebook communities in 2013 and 14 when I started my business. And I felt like my voice was not as heard. I felt like there were assumptions about what I was and wasn't doing and all of those sorts of things. And so it just, in the end, I ended up leaving a very, very popular community and saying, look, if you're not willing to address people have different lived experiences, and you can't just keep saying we have to get up earlier in order to be successful, because I care not to see a sunrise ever in my life, then I'm going to start something else. And so I started it because I felt like I was marginalized in those spaces as a woman. It was the men who generally dominated the conversation. They would just belittle people for saying that they couldn't because they had the kids at home or those sorts of things. And it was always through this lens of privilege that they were giving advice or answering people's questions. And so I decided to create a space where we kept it, the conversation was for women and non-binary people in that community. And then if I created that community because of that marginalization, it would then be a little rich of me to not acknowledge my privilege and understand that other people within that community also experience marginalization from other angles. And therefore, I think it's important as the space holder or the administrator of that group to ensure that I'm not marginalizing the very people that I pulled together in a community because I was being marginalized. That just seems a little like short-sighted. And so it's been very important from the outset. Yeah.
Excellent. And we love you for it, Tash. We truly do. And I think discussions around privilege, around marginalization, around business, around productivity, and all of those things, it can be very fraught. So I think bringing our recognition of our own privilege into the discussion about this book is going to be really helpful as well. So, Mika, what book are we discussing?
Atomic Habits, an easy and proven way to build good habits and break bad ones, by James Clear.
Excellent. Thank you, Mika. It's funny, when I first came across this book, it was it was shared with me by a guy I had a big crush on at the time. And I was kind of like, oh yeah, I'll check it out. But it's one of these books that my relationship with it and my feelings about it are constantly changing. Yeah.
I think there's like some good points that come up in it. I just think all of them need like a big star afterwards. Like, yes, but.
Yeah, I would agree, Mika. That's probably my biggest assessment of the book itself, is that it's very clear to me that this book has been written by someone with unacknowledged or privilege that they haven't unpacked properly, right? And so there are a lot of sweeping statements and generalizations, and there are a lot of statements where it's, well, this worked for me or this worked for this person, so it should work for everyone, where those assumptions haven't been questioned or unpacked any further. And so it's something where, yes, I think that there are some really valuable insights into how we can change behavior or how we can start a new activity and keep going with it. But unfortunately, a lot of the power of that message is lost because that privilege kind of goes unchecked. And so, yeah, I would agree with you, Mika, that it's got some great points, but everything needs a star afterwards. Yeah.
Even just like just choose one habit and then build little bits. The privilege to be allowed to do that is an entire thing. Most of us get thrown out into the world and just suddenly have to change our entire way of being.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as usual, when we talk about these books, we are speaking about them through the lens of intersectionality. But I always like to start with things that we might like about the book or aspects that may have been helpful for us on a personal level, if any, or things that may be helpful on a societal level about these books. But do you have anything that comes to mind, Tash? Like, do you have anything nice to say about this book?
I do think that the structure that is given to stacking habits on top of each other, the way that there's a differentiation between goals versus habits, I think that it gives a lot of voice to some of those things that if we didn't actually think it through, we wouldn't necessarily realize that we are calling a goal a habit or calling a habit a goal or those types of things. I also think that actually the structure for changing a habit, so the 4-step process, the cue, craving, response, reward, that is based in a lot of evidence. And I do think that that is intersectional in that we all tend to respond in the same way in that order. But the cues that people who experience marginalization experience are very different to the cues that someone with a lot of privilege or a lot of wealth would experience. And so I think the structure underneath is actually great. And I do think that as long as you're able to read the book through that lens of not judging or blaming yourself for your experiences, not trying to apply the structure to your life through the lens of trying to change your identity, which is something that he talks about a lot. So as long as we can unpack those things, which is exactly what this podcast is for. So big tick, congratulations. Thank you so much for being able to do this. I think that the book is actually quite sound. It's just that it is not at all intersectional in its current form.
The identity thing, you said you don't like the use of identity to establish changes. For me, actually, that was one of the things I liked, because to me, envisioning the person I want to be helps me to make sustained changes. But to me, that's my main goal, is to always continually be a better person. And so I'm always looking to the person that I want to be. I always have that future vision of me. Anyway, that was just my input on the identity thing. But there's so many ways to interpret the way they've worded things in this book.
I definitely want to dive into the identity aspect and some of the specifics around habit change and some of the really dodgy examples that come up as well. But before we dive into those things, I just want to reflect on what you said, Tash, about goals versus habits. I think that's a very useful aspect of this book, because sometimes people, when they think about the habits that they want to build or the habits that they want to break, they're not really focusing on the right things. They might say things like, I want to build a habit of perseverance. It's like, that's not a habit. That's like a character trait, that's like a way of being that you want. It's like,
that's
Yeah, it's like if we're looking at habits, we need to look at something quite specific, right? Or like, I want to build a habit of making lots of money. It's like, that's not a habit.
I have to admit, I actually got a little bit confused about the difference between goals and habits in this book.
Okay.
Because to me, like, a lot of, not even goals and habits, but like what they said was a goal and not a way to establish a good habit. I'm like, but why would I be motivated to establish a habit if it weren't for reaching a goal with it?
Yeah, and I see that actually a lot where because of my work, I am often seeing content from people who are very much goals oriented and help people achieve goals. But I also see a lot of content from people who are more in this sort of systems and habits field. And what I find really interesting is that people who are in the goal space, so people who talk about manifesting a goal, or they talk about going for a big stretch goal in your life or in your business, they say that like having the goal is that North Star and it's having that vision. And so that's why it's so powerful and it's so inspiring.
Yeah.
And therefore, like that is the most important thing, is to focus on the goal, and how you get there. You can figure it out as you go. It's totally fine. But the most important thing is to align to this sense of achievement of the goal. But they almost dismiss the work that's required to get there in doing so. And they also dismiss the gap between where you are now and where your goal actually sits. And that comes from privilege for a lot of people. But then on the other side, I found that this particular book kind of dismissed the goal piece and was just like, focus on the habit and focus on the process. But as you said, Mika, if you're focused on embedding a habit and you're focused on a process, but there's no reason to embed that habit, there's nothing that it's actually going to get you to achieve, it doesn't go anywhere, then the motivation or the driver to actually accomplish it or to stick with it is not as strong. And so the big thing that I got from this book was just saying, like, can we stop saying it's one or the other, and why can't we just have both? Like, they work together so beautifully.
Yes.
Yeah, looking at where these things can overlap in a way that's helpful is really useful. And it's funny because you mentioned the whole thing about like, I get a little triggered sometimes by the word manifest for reasons that I'm sure I don't have to explain to you, Tash.
Not at all. I wanted to use it very purposefully.
Yeah. I could almost see a little wink in your eyes just then.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that comes from the fact that a lot of manifesting is actually just bypassing.
Yeah.
A lot of manifesting is that we are just thinking our way to the goals that we have and ignoring reality, or that in order to really understand and connect with manifesting, you need to acknowledge that you are responsible for everything you've experienced in your life. You are responsible for creating your reality. And that really doesn't work well when you take intersectionality into consideration, because the fact that systemic racism exists does not fall on the shoulders of people who have been subject to that racism. And the longer that we stay caught in that belief that it's one or the other, or that manifesting is completely down to an individual's responsibility, then the longer that we can kind of ignore the fact that these marginalizations exist and everyone's just responsible for themselves, and you step away from the very thing that I crave, which is this sense of we're in this together and we need to look after each other and we need to support each other. Well, if I'm just focused on my own experience and my own responsibility for my lived experiences, then it's almost like it's me against the world, and I don't want to live in a world like that. So
yeah, exactly. And it's interesting that you bring up systemic racism specifically, because I remember the first time I read this book, something that stood out for me, something that I actually really appreciated, was how he specifically mentioned, let's see, I'm looking at page 19. So on page 19, he's got this whole chart to kind of sum up this whole idea of positive compounding and negative compounding, and labels the whole thing, your habits can compound for you or against you. And one of the examples that he presents is where he says outrage compounds. So he writes, riots, protests, and mass movements are rarely the result of a single event. Instead, a long series of microaggressions and daily aggravations slowly multiply until one event tips the scales and outrage spreads like wildfire. Now, the reason that I so appreciated that was because, and I think this is also an illustration of just how little this is ever brought up in personal development writing, that one tiny little recognition that, like protests and like widespread outrage are not just, pesky protesters having a bad day. It's because of these little things that happen, or, big things, but these smaller moments that happen over and over and over and over again that then lead to the mass mobilization of people.
Well, you've got entire populations being told you have to bottle this up. You have to bottle up all these feelings, all these experiences, and not talk about them and not make people uncomfortable by voicing your discomfort and your anger and your just frustration at the world.
Yeah.
And so when suddenly the space starts opening up where everyone's going, but you know what? Me too. This happens to me as well, and I'm sick of it. And of course it's going to compound because it's just like a permission has been given that it's time to talk about it.
Yeah. And this book was published in 2018, right? So this was before 2020, when everything happened, when everything in the whole world happened.
The world changed in 2020.
Yeah. And I'm pretty sure I first read this book in 2020, shortly after George Floyd's murder, right? And the Black Lives Matter uprisings that were happening all over the world as a result of what a lot of people who don't understand saw as one incident, this one guy being killed by police and it being captured on camera. What a lot of people didn't understand about, why are people so mad about this George Floyd guy? It's like, hang on, it's not just about George Floyd. No. This is generations of outrage.
Yeah.
And the outpouring of support and frustration and anger that we were seeing around the world was like that was just a flashpoint for all of this. But that's not to say that this book is in any way a beacon of social justice, because it's really, really not. Like, there are some things that are likable. There are some things that I think need to be put right in the bin.
Yep.
Yeah.
So why do you think this book is so popular, Tash?
I think because everyone has something that they want to change or they want to do differently, and having a structure or a process that is based in some neuroscience, but also in a lot of different people's experiences, just gives rise to this sense of, okay, well, I've got a way that I can make meaning out of why it hasn't worked before, and also try to make it work this time around. And so, as I said when we were talking about what we liked about the book, I do think that structure and having a process and having some formulas to play with to try and see if you can change those behaviors, I think it's fabulous. Everyone goes through the New Year's. Am I setting resolutions? Am I not setting resolutions? Right? We all have that shared experience of wanting to do something differently, or wanting to achieve a goal, or wanting to get away from a habit that we've formed. And so that whole human experience of wanting to change behavior, it's pretty universal. And so because of that, I think the book really did get that groundswell of support, because it's given such tangible resources and structure to how we could do that more effectively.
Now, as you all know, I have a personal development book club that I've been running for nearly 3 years. And Atomic Habits is the only book that we've discussed twice.
Mm.
And the reason for that is largely because it's still so hugely influential. It's still like one of the books you'll most frequently find at the airport bookstore. It's still on so many people's recommended reading list. It's still in a lot of top bestseller lists, like legit bestseller lists, not these like dodgy, like, I'm an international bestseller, but that's a whole other pet peeve I'm not going to get into. And I think one of the positives about the book's popularity to me is the fact that it's kind of given more common folk more of a shared language around habit formation in a way that makes it easier to kind of casually keep each other accountable in a way that other books, because there have been so many books about habits written, right? Like forever, like 1 million billion, I think, the last time I counted. But when you've got one that's just really captured the imagination of the public, you can kind of point to specific examples and just kind of know that that a lot of people have read the book and will know what you're talking about.
Yep.
Or the other thing that I found helpful about the book and that the book club found helpful is this focus on systems over willpower. I think people do rely on willpower too much when they want to enact some sort of behavior change, and they don't necessarily look at their environment or they're making things harder for themselves than they have to because there's this idea that it's like, no, you just have to will yourself to do it, and that's the mark of a strong person.
I think it's important to remember what motivates each individual is totally different for every person. And saying like there's this one way of doing it is never going to be consistent.
Yeah.
And like that's one of the things I agree with in this book as well. Your habits and systems, changing those and working on those and sticking to them will eventually create a habit. How that's done and whether that will work just through willpower alone is not the same for everyone. And the time you have to do those before it becomes habitual is different for different brains.
Yeah. Sorry, I've got a little transition piece.
Transition is my thing.
Sorry, Mika, I didn't mean to transitionally appropriate just then.
That's mine.
Oh.
I own all the Latin roots of words.
Excuse me, Latin roots. I was going to do an accent just then, but I'm not going to do that. Hashtag Peruvian, hashtag Via Garcia. Yeah, I want to talk about these 4 laws of behavior change, and then I want y'all to tell me what you think, okay? And this is the thing. Like, we know this is made up largely, right? This isn't something that James Clear has done like a heap of research about and performed studies on to then go, I figured it out. These are the 4 laws of behavior change. And it doesn't seem like he's claiming to have like figured that out either. But if we've learned nothing else yet from this podcast, pointing out when things do have valid research behind them and when they absolutely do not, 5 love languages, is really important. We can still find these things really useful, but we need to know like that it's just kind of made up. It can be okay, it's just kind of made up. All right, so the 4 laws of behavior change according to James Clear. The first law, make it obvious. The second law, make it attractive. The third law, make it easy. The fourth law, make it satisfying. I find that as a model helpful for me personally. It's nothing new. It's just a different way of stating something that is worth reminding people of. But tell me, what do y'all think about that?
Yeah, I think that's the most helpful of the structures inside this book. I think that the other way that I think it's talked about is that cue, craving, response, reward. So the make it obvious is like give yourself a cue to remind yourself. Very good for people who experience object permanence. So the exec function conversation in the room for the neurodivergent. So make it obvious, like make it attractive. So that's like crave the thing that it's going to create for you. Make it easy. So make it easy to respond to that cue, and then make it satisfying in creating, like giving yourself some form of reward or making it a rewarding experience. So I think that that's probably the most valuable out of all of the structures that are provided in this book, for sure.
And you don't have to put a reference if you reword it strongly enough.
That's true.
I should just write a self-help book, then I don't have to worry about actual facts or referencing.
Perfect.
Yes.
I'll come to your book launch.
The world according to Mika. Thank you. So there has actually been a lot of research into habit forming. And neuroscientists have been able to find some of the parts of the brain involved in that circuitry that creates this cue, craving, response, reward system. So we got the prefrontal cortex, orbitofrontal cortex, and sensorimotor cortex. I'm not good at saying these words.
You looked really upset saying that last one.
I know. I'm trying to study anatomy and I'm terrible at saying these, like, all these anatomy words.
We still love you.
Sensorimotor cortex. I'm just going to skip the I.
Okay.
And it's quite complicated that I don't think we're going to go into without a whole lot of long-winded things. But the point is this is a hardwired part of human physiology. Like, habit forming is not magic. It's not just made up. And so it's important to understand that in some people's brains, they don't work the same way. So it is shown in people with ADHD, that particularly prefrontal cortex, that there is differences. And so to try and say, well, you should just willpower your way around the way your mind is even physically structured is ridiculous. And I spent most of my life feeling guilty that I wasn't able to brute force my way through being different.
Yeah.
And finding out well into my late 20s that there is a good reason that I have struggled so hard at life.
Yeah.
And that no matter how... And I've got burnout illnesses from trying so hard to do it everyone else's way.
Yeah.
And that now I'm just done with that. And I'm like, no, I'm still going to get to my goals, but I'm going to go my way, my route.
Yeah. And that's one of the downsides of when books like this become so hugely popular. As much as it can give us more of a shared vocabulary around, or even like, trending vocabulary, or a resurgence of past trending vocabulary around a habit formation, it can also make it harder for people to understand that it's not going to work for everyone. And it can be yielded as a weapon sometimes. It's like, oh no, all you need to do is, just stack your habits. Just bundle your temptations.
And you don't want to take away from how it probably has helped a lot of people because it speaks to them, and that's fine. And that's why I do see a lot of positives in the key parts of it. Yeah. But there are some big stars next to some of it, and some parts that I absolutely are like, this particular thing I have some issues with.
Yeah.
We'll get into that later.
Good one. Yep. I'm with you on that. And I would also say that a lot of the examples given and a lot of the reasons to do things and the labeling of certain things as good habits or bad habits, that's where it's in the detail and the application that we see some of those more, overarching themes that ignore intersectionality and that do make some people feel like there's something wrong with them if they can't make that work or if they can't get that one to stick. Yeah. And I've also experienced that burnout. I spent most of my corporate career trying to become a morning person because I had been told all the time that if you get up at the same time every day, you'll be more productive. If you get up earlier, you'll be more productive. And so, I experienced burnout several times simply because I was trying to create habits and pour myself into, like, I'm a square peg in a round hole kind of situation of demonstrating habits that actually weren't made for me. And so that's where, I think that's such a good point, Mika, because it's the detail, it's the nuance where we lose some of that ability to apply this in different ways for different people.
Yeah. And we talk all the time about how where personal development books can become dangerous is oversimplifying very complex topics. And of course, the people who lose out the most when people embed these ideas into their minds are people from marginalized communities. And in the book, one of the early examples of that, I'm just looking at page 18 here. In the introductory, no, it's not the introduction. It's in the surprising power of atomic habits section, right? He writes, "It doesn't matter how successful or unsuccessful you are right now. What matters is whether your habits are putting you on the path towards success. You should be far more concerned with your current trajectory than with your current results." Okay, like that's fine, right? But then, there's a little bit more to that paragraph. And then the next paragraph, this is where I was like, ugh. He writes, "Your outcomes are a lagging measure of your habits. Your net worth is a lagging measure of your financial habits. Your weight is a lagging measure of your eating habits. Your knowledge is a lagging measure of your learning habits. Your clutter is a lagging measure of your cleaning habits. You get what you repeat."
My eye is twitching.
Yeah, I'm not triggered at all.
And reading that again when I was skimming through the book, I was like, yet again, it's like this is a book that overall I've gotten a lot from. But I always look at these things from the viewpoint of their societal impacts as well. And it's things like that can be so shamey. So what's got your eye all a twitch over that statement?
I think it's because every single one of those statements is something we could actually unpack and see that it has far more to do with someone's lived experience or their start in life than it does with their habits. So for example, your level of education is a lagging measure of your study habits. Well, actually, your level of education is also a lagging measure of the extent to which your family had wealth when you were born. The level of presence that you have from your parents, the level of presence from your parents may have something to do with the fact that they have to have 3 jobs to keep you in school. The fact that you have a different level of education maybe because the systems of education were not built for your brain or for the learning structure and strategy that you need in order to absorb new information. And so there's just like 1,000 different reasons why there would be a contributing factor beyond my habits as to what my results would look like. And that is completely glossed over.
Yeah. And that's something that has become, one of the things that I've been diving deep into a lot in recent years is my own neurodivergence, my autistic traits and things like that, and thinking about my educational experiences. And some of the ways in which I struggled as a Black girl in the 80s and 90s in a very white school district when I was having trouble focusing or listening in class or staying on task, I was written off as a lost cause. Right?
Yep.
I was a really smart kid.
I bet you were.
But it wasn't their flavor of smart. So when, you read things like your knowledge is a lagging measure of your learning habits, it's like you can only imagine like the kind of brilliant minds that are trapped in these systems that are just not helping to cultivate what is inside them. It's not as simple as saying you only know these things because of the things that you were doing.
Even just looking at the difference between having parents with a higher education raising children to children raised from parents that have struggled and fought to give their children a better future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, those kids work hard to catch up, but they don't get the same start.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I was even lucky, as much as the school system failed me in some ways, but didn't fail me in others. Like, I came from a family that really valued education. My dad is a very, very much an education guy, a very well-educated person. And so I still had that backup at home to see that I wasn't a lost cause, the way my school district treated me.
I had the same experience of I couldn't read until I was 10. Like, I could just manage like little words, but everyone else was kind of like, that's never going to work out, broken there. And my parents were just like, no, that's not true.
So you didn't try habit stacking, Mika?
My parents sat every night with me and read me books every night. And I would sit there and I would try and follow along with the words, but I just didn't get it. It wasn't working. But we kept doing it, and eventually my brain just developed enough to, or however it works.
Okay, so let me ask you a technical question. So there was this process that your parents had to help your brain develop. By what percentage every day do you think you improved using that technique?
Not 1%.
No?
365 times.
I'd love to know where these numbers come from.
0.01%.
Okay.
But it's not, because this has been my case with me my whole life with learning. I look like a totally stupid, know nothing. I'm all like, ooh, I don't get it. And then suddenly my brain just goes, and now you understand everything.
Yeah.
Because I need to know how it all connects and how it all works before I can understand any of it. I can't just, the way classes are structured, they're just like, learn this little bit and then learn this little bit. And at the end, you will have learnt it all. And my brain's like, no. Why would I want to know that if I don't know what it does and how that connects to the world and how like a million different threads touch everything?
See, and like 10-year-old me would have been like, and who was impacted by all of this? What structures are in place that are going to make sure that there's equality for everyone?
That's why I only like try and stick to journals in my discipline. Otherwise I get totally off track.
That is awesome. I think also, like, we've touched on education and how the brain works, but I mean, every single one of those examples, if you think about the money thing, how many boomers have been telling Gen Z kids that they need to give up their avocado toast because they have a completely different view of the world, even based on the time in which they needed to save a deposit to buy a home, right? And then that doesn't even take into consideration differences of like intergenerational wealth and intergenerational trauma. That doesn't take into consideration, I mean, in the US, it's even wilder with like the house lending criteria and the interest rates are charged difference based on different neighborhoods. Like, that is just absolutely astounding and appalling to me. But even in a country like Australia, which kind of prides itself on being a meritocracy and prides itself on having this fair go for everyone, we had a complete stolen generation. We had people who, in my corporate work, one of the things that I worked on was helping First Nations people to own their own home, because the structures and legal systems used for native title in Australia meant that no one got to own a home on native land. And so the very thing that is the fair go in Australia is not available to First Nations people who live on native title land. And so there's just so much depth and so much nuance to every single one of those factors. Wait, I know that I'm someone who my eating habits, as he says in his book, were the most rigid and restricted eating habits, because I was really struggling with a lot of health conditions. And it was actually stuff like this that meant I didn't get the medical diagnosis and help that I needed for a lot longer, because I kept blaming myself and I kept saying, well, it must come down to me. It must be my habits. It must be what I'm doing that is the problem. And so we just see this in every single category that is raised there, that there are so many other reasons why people may struggle. And if we try and simplify it down to your habits and what you do is the number one driver, we will lose the capacity to have any kind of empathy for other people's experiences. And we also stop looking at the systemic issues that cause the problem in the first place. And so they're the two big things for me that I wish that we could add all of that into the book and then redistribute it to everyone who's bought it and read it, because I do think it has actually slowed down the conversation around systemic issues, and it has slowed down the conversation around understanding and having empathy for other people's situations. And so that's where it really starts to make my eye twitch.
Yeah. And I totally agree. And this is a good illustration of why my relationship with this book is tends to waver. Because again, being a Black, Latina, neurodivergent, queer woman with chronic health issues and stuff like that, when I do find little gems within the piles of crap, I tend to cling on to them, because in some ways, the layers of crap that I'm sifting through take on a special kind of weight. It's just never ending, right? So
you
it's
have to put on your waders.
Exactly. So it's when I say, oh yeah, I like the book Atomic Habits because of the way it outlines such, I mean that on a very kind of niche personal level, not in a way that I would say, I think everyone should read this book because it's going to change everyone's lives. Because that's, again, the personal development genre is such that you can't look at one book to be the thing that's going to change your life. You need to examine your sources critically.
Can I also add in there, Leslie, I would also say that this is where our relationship with personal development is deeply personal. So if everyone read Atomic Habits and applied it in their own situation in a way that worked for them and didn't try to tell everyone else to do the same thing, we would actually have a very different experience of the book. But the biggest challenge that I have is that every time someone else talks to me about Atomic Habits, they're trying to tell me how to do it in the way that worked for them, instead of allowing me to have my own relationship with my habits, my identity, and my goals. And so that's where the problem comes, is trying to have this shared experience of a book that so many people have read, that actually the very magic of this book comes from individualized implementation. And so you can't apply it to someone else the way that it's applied to you.
Absolutely. And that's something that came up a lot when Mika and I were talking about Who Moved My Cheese.
Yes. And
that's one of those books that from a top-down approach, it's freaking horrible. But on that deeply personal level, it can kind of shift your individual thinking. But then if you expect everyone else to experience it in the exact same way, you could be causing harm to them.
Yes. Yeah. And the application of Who Moved My Cheese in organizations as like their number one tool, therefore, led to a lot of problems. Yes.
Yeah.
I have to say the damage that radical responsibility has had in that people go, oh, it's just about me making myself feel responsible. Okay, if that's what you want to do, but then you start projecting that on everyone else and being like, well, if I make everything my problem and I'm at fault for everything I do, then you're at fault for everything you do.
Yeah.
And there's no room to understand that different experiences mean different things.
Yeah. Yeah.
All these conversations, both in some previous episodes and this, has brought me to my little diagram here. Let me just show you.
We'll put a link to the diagram in our show notes.
Yep. Gorgeous.
So I have some wibbly wobbly blobs of nuance. We got human experience, privilege and disadvantage, all kind of crossing over each other in this mess. And then a big square box over the top, comfortable simplification box. And it only covers a little bit of that wibbly wobbly clouds and how they all intersect and how it's not the same. But I feel like a lot of these discussions and books often, not even this one that seems has more nuance to it, people read it and then they're like, oh, but I want the comfortable simplification box.
Yeah.
And I want this to apply to everything because I can understand the world now.
Yeah. We need an antidote to this chaos.
Yeah.
Special anti-shout out to someone special there. Yeah.
Yeah. And I've got a really tangible example of this one actually, is that because of the community that I facilitate, and there is a lot of personal development in there, and there is a lot of this radical self-responsibility, when people come into that group space and talk about their experience of personal responsibility and how it's helped them and shaped them, it's actually really inspiring and it's really beautiful. The problem is the minute that they pour it out onto someone else, or the minute that they use it as advice for other people, that's where we see those big conversations unfold and a lot of different disagreements and needing to navigate that conversation. And I do think that there is that whole, we see it in every kind of infomercial. If I could do it, you can too, right? And so everyone
There has to be a better way.
There has to be a better way. Don't worry, I found it. And if I, and they always use like, if I, a high school dropout, can do it, you can too. Like, it's always that one thing. They always talk about high school dropouts, like for some reason, that's the biggest marginalization you can experience in your life, is being a high school dropout. Don't think that they have quite nailed that one, but
all you need is daddy to invest in your company.
Yeah, exactly, right? I just need a couple of $1 million loan from my dad. I paid interest on it. I paid it back. So, yeah, I think that's that, like, if I can do it, you can do it too, which also stems from people's deepest desire, which is to help each other. And so it often doesn't come from a place of disrespect or come from a space of, oh, I want you to suffer listening to me talk about how I sorted it out. It does come from a space of wanting to help, but in that excitement or desire to help others, there comes this need to really unpack where it's come from and understand that your lived experience is different to someone else's. And so that's where it just becomes really like challenging to be able to navigate those conversations and help people to see that not all solutions are made for all people, and that we need to have that nuance around it. And it's just wherever nuance is required, that's where things get tricky.
Yes. People have a funny relationship with nuance sometimes.
But it's so messy. It's got all messy edges. I just want to trim those sweet, sweet edges to a nice straight line.
Yeah.
No matter how much I trim, I never get it straight though.
Mika, are you being cheeky?
I just can't get myself straight.
Not even surgically? What's going on?
You try, it just never works. Bisexual life.
Oh my gosh. I want like the Mika version of Atomic Habits. I was going to go off on a tangent.
ADHD. In fact, wait, that needs to be one of our buttons. ADHD moment.
Oh, let me put that on a to-do list. And when I
ADHD
open up the
tangent.
to-do list, I'm going to get distracted by all the other shiny to-dos on my to-do list. And we are back. So,
Some of the examples in this book, though, I don't think are good for anyone.
yeah.
I think they're contributing to some major societal issues. Eating disorders.
Yes, actually, that's what I was going to bring up. Even just from that one little mini paragraph where he says your weight is a lagging measure of your eating habits. That's setting us up again for some really challenging, potentially very triggering conversations around weight.
I'm getting my soapbox out.
Your soapbox looks a lot like a Daryl E. Nougat Easter egg.
Not sponsored.
Yet. Anyway, it's one of these generic, cheap, go-to examples, like illustrations of progress, of success. Someone can have like everything else in their life falling apart, but if they go through some weight loss journey, that undoes any other failure that they might be experiencing internally or externally. It's something that's so visible.
You know what's great about it too? Is you're like in this world where you're not getting any of that sweet feedback that you need of instant gratification, and then you start losing weight and everyone's just like, oh my God, you look so good. Oh, congratulations. Good on you for losing weight, blah, blah, blah. And then you just feed into it. You're like, oh yeah, like success, great, achieving. And
no matter how that weight loss has been achieved, whether it's purposeful or not, it's like, it could be really ill.
You can't get addictive at all.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite TikToks to watch, is actually where people share how did they lose the weight that everyone congratulated them on. And so, there are people who share that they were victims of domestic violence, and of course then they've lost a lot of weight. And the number one thing that everyone said to them as they were like completely disappearing was, oh my gosh, you look amazing, right? And it's like, or someone talked about going through cancer treatment and no one ever asked her, is the sudden weight loss we've seen from you a good thing or a bad thing? Like everyone just congratulated her on it. And so it is just so fraught, the assumptions we make.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of people really oversimplify weight loss and weight gain. But I know also in the book, some of the things that are mentioned around like structuring your space for healthier eating and like where to put your healthy food so you see it and this and that. It's like on the surface, it's like fine if you've never actually struggled severely with disordered eating, but the level of detail that is brought up in some of this it's like an instruction book for disordered eating. And it's not even mentioned that there isn't any kind of word of caution or disclaimer in there, or like, just to be sure, if you're having a lot of struggles with this, perhaps speak to a professional. Like nothing that even hints at that.
Skip this chapter if you have these feelings.
Yeah. Do not choose this adventure. Skip to the next page. But yeah.
Even just the mention of the structuring your space to like have the healthy foods, that leads into feeling embarrassed about having a culturally perceived unhealthy food in a visible place, which leads to secretive eating, which
Yep.
leads to binge eating, which leads to just this deep, dark well.
Yeah.
They're all little steps. And because it's habit forming, it slowly ingrains itself, and you don't even understand, because there's such little steps. 1% change every day
Yes.
until 100% eating disorder.
Oh, God.
I laugh because it's sad.
Yeah.
And that actually ties really well, actually, back to the conversation we're having to start, where I have a little problem with this idea of identity, because the start of the book gives us this definition that says if we build identity-based habits, we'll focus on who we wish to become. But then the detail of the book throughout gives us almost the impression that the identity that we should be aspiring to is a straight white man who's skinny and has a lot of money, and not
is
everyone
neurotypical.
actually, and is neurotypical, and not everyone actually aspires to being that person. But there's not a lot of space in this book to be clear on what is the identity that you want to embrace for you. And also, I think that this book could have used a whole chapter on actually unpacking, where did that identity come from? Why do you want to be the kind of person who's really organized and has a clean desk? Is it because that actually helps you, or is it because you were rewarded for clean spaces as a child or at school, or you have seen
I was not.
You've seen in movies that the richest person has the cleanest desk, or, you know, we have so much conscious and unconscious programming about what makes for a disciplined person. I mean, the term discipline even makes me shudder. Or what makes for a successful person, or the kind of person we want to aspire to be. And I think for a lot of people, without that being unpacked, it's very easy to fall into the trap of just aspiring to an identity that actually isn't helpful to you. I don't aspire to be neurotypical, because that aspiration just leads to burnout. I don't aspire to be a morning person, because in my experience, that has led to burnout. I don't aspire to be skinny. In my experience, aspiring to that makes me depressed. And so I think that's where that identity piece really was a challenge for me, because that identity, it wasn't unpacked at all. There was no questioning of what that identity would be. And if we just do it by default, I think that there's a lot of societal norms and a lot of systemic issues with certain differences and marginalizations that mean we are trying to aspire to be someone we can never be.
Yep.
And that clarification has shown me where our difference in opinion started, because my feeling of identity being important to being able to change your habits and systems so that you can reach your goals comes from years of one-on-one therapy, developing that identity of realistically actually breaking down and saying, oh, this whole time I have been trying to be a normal person. When that's never going to be, that's not achievable, that's not reachable. And also, why do I feel that way? Because I've been told it. Who do I actually want to be? I want to be Mika, this awesome, talented, queer, neuro, spicy boy who wants to grow up to be a real man. Wants to grow up to be myself. And grow out of those societal expectations of who you should be.
That level of self-awareness and that level of self-exploration is so important to that identity piece actually being helpful. And so, I agree. That's exactly why we're looking at it from different angles, because I think about it through the lens of my niece or my nephew, who still, they're aspiring to be someone that I don't aspire for them to be, because I can see that they just want that because of society or because of
TikTok,
what's been put onto them by their parents or whatever it might be. And yeah, or by TikTok. And so, yeah, that makes such a difference to that expression of it and what we choose as the identity that we want to aspire to.
Yeah. I aspire to be satisfying slime. That is what TikTok has influenced me into becoming. I just want to be needed. I want to be needed. I want to make the sounds that make the people go, ooh.
I once heard, I think it was, maybe it was a carpool karaoke or something with Sam Smith. And Sam was talking about aspiring to be like this person who owned a giant pool house and wore long caftans and said, you know, the party's out the back, everyone come on out. And actually, I realized for myself, that's the first time I'd ever heard someone aspire to live a life of pleasure and relaxation and partying rather than aspiring to discipline and hard work and success.
Rise and grind.
And it was, oh my gosh, it was just such an eye-opener for me because I was like, oh, I could be, and I think he used Elton John as an example, right? He wanted to be like, they wanted to be like a diva and have this amazing life, and we're just hanging out by the pool. And I was like, oh, are we allowed to want that? Aren't we supposed to want to like hustle and work hard? And yeah, so that was maybe 5 or 6 years ago that I saw that. And it really did awaken something in me that I needed to question what those aspirations were and what those goals were and what those assumptions were about what would get me there as well.
And I think one good way to kind of tie those things together is to say that if you are creating goals, creating habits based around some sort of idea of identity, it's important not to like leapfrog over all the work that needs to be done to jump right into like, you know, I'm a multi-billionaire. And so all of my habits now will point me in that direction. And then I'm going to get there and I'm going to go, oh, this kind of sucks because this isn't actually aligned with my values or anything.
Oh, I was just going to say that brings us back to our fun conversation about manifesting, right? Is that a lot of the manifesting stuff is about embodying the identity of someone who's achieved the goal already or who has the money already. But the financial decisions that I would make with $1 million nest egg behind me are very different to the financial decisions I would make knowing that my income is unstable or that I don't have the safety net that someone else has. And so it really is that whole sense of understanding that everyone starts from a different place and we don't all have the privilege to play with embodying this sense of being a billionaire and making decisions that way.
But MLM boss babes would call you a stinker thinker.
Right.
Why do you pay your insurance monthly? It's so much cheaper if you pay yearly. No shit. Thanks for telling me. I had no idea. I just need $1,000.
Oh, sorry. I had your genius medal on me, but I accidentally replaced it with some avocado toast. And that is why I'm broke.
Damn, you should have known better.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think that with all of those ones around identity, it's understanding and acknowledging that we don't all have the privilege to play with identity in the same way. And that for some people, financial security and stability must be taken care of first and foremost before any of that risk taking. And a big one that shows up a lot in gender studies is around the willingness to take risks with family money. So if someone is and it's not necessarily gendered, but it's aligned with generally the primary caregiver, which is generally gendered, so that, you know, it could come from multiple spaces. But this whole sense of, I was listening to this millionaire business owner, and he was talking about how he was married with 2 kids and he separated from his wife, and he was in the States, and he decided to move to New York and couch surf and hustle and grind, and he did whatever it took and and not one person asked him, what about your children? But if it had been his wife who had made the exact same decision, it would have been the very first question she was asked.
I'm sorry,
Yep.
he did that with children? Like, just went and couch surfed?
He had 2 kids. He just left them with his ex-partner and went and couch surfed and lived the life of a single man again in order to make the business success happen. And he's being like giving the pat on the back for being willing to do the hard yards and willing to put it on the line and willing to couch surf and willing to this, when in fact, if it was his ex-wife who had done the very same thing, and even if she had left them in his capable care back in their hometown, she would have been criticized and hauled through the mud for the fact that she left her children behind for that extended period of time. And yet he was rewarded and celebrated for it.
And her journey, even in amongst that criticism, would have still been a lot harder, because it would have been a lot harder for her to be taken seriously as she was grinding.
Yep.
But I mean, lazy housewives just staying at home and caring for children, like they don't do any work.
Yeah, no,
Like-
not at all.
I'm the breadwinner and I go out and I bring the money home. You should be grateful.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. I'm not a parent, but I actually recently did a big piece on how much respect I have for parents who do other things at the same time, based on a very short-term experience that I had of living with my sister and her partner and their 2 kids. And I said, I'll take care of like school runs and after school activities and everything while I'm in the house. And that was my only part of responsibility with those children, but I got nothing done. Nothing. I achieved nothing because it just felt like I never had a moment to myself and all those sorts of pieces. And so I totally understand that, like, from that lens of every single person's experience is so different. And there's no way from the outside that we could ever pretend to understand that experience. I got 6 weeks as a part-time parent just during the day. And I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know how you even think straight at night. How are you even up at 7 o'clock at night? I don't understand this.
Or where they find the Leslie, as a parent, find the motivation to just keep on getting up every morning. I looked after my nephew for one night and I was just like, oh my God, thank goodness he goes home to his, like, I love him, but it's so tiring. I'm exhausted.
It is exhausting. Yeah. And I'll tell you what, I mean, even with my daughter, like, we have conversations about habits, about routines and things like that. And I kind of do need to oversimplify things for her because she's 7. But even like, when I think about the habits that I try to put into place, or the systems that I try to put into place in my day-to-day home life, kind of sculpting my environment in a way that's going to, help me rise and grind or whatever. It's like, okay, that kind of goes out the window when your kid has a fever and everything falls apart, or when I have some business task that I have to get to immediately that I hadn't foreseen that pops up. So then the quality time that I'm left with my kid while I'm trying to do this task is me on my computer, lying on my belly, and literally she'll just sit on my back or on my bottom. And I just kind of make her part of that task, because for me, it helps me feel like we're connected. It helps me feel like, okay, even though this might not be the most fun thing for her, like, she's watching what I'm doing. She's watching like what I'm building with my business and everything. And she comes to my book club as well. And she kind of sees the things that I do that kind of, it's like the whole like brute forcing your way into having a routine and having habits while also trying to be a mom. It's not as simple as just saying, okay, I'm going to make some stuff obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying, and that's going to be the end of it. It's a nice thing to aspire to in some very specific contexts, but it's not gonna work for everyone all the time.
I mean, I just wanted to mention too, from a neurodivergent perspective, or at least from the ADHD presentation, you always will brute force habits. Like, you basically have to decide every morning that you're going to do it.
Yeah.
It becomes more easy. It becomes easier, but takes me 2 or 3 nights of missing my bedtime or my wake up time and out the window. Like, I just completely fall apart in every part of my life.
Yeah.
You know, one missed meal here or there. I just don't know what's going on anymore. It feels like everything falls apart.
Yeah.
I'm tiptoeing on the edge of a knife. And children seem to pull you every which way.
Literally. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think there's really not enough compassion for parents, for, you know, women. Oh, you make your whole identity about your kids. It's like, have you tried raising kids? You don't get any other time. And then
heaven
neurodivergent
forbid,
parents.
I was just going to say as well, like, heaven forbid that you don't make your identity about your children as a mother, because then you're judged for that, right? Like, but you're a mother first, right?
You have to be everything.
Yeah.
You're not allowed to, you know, actually have a normal person's load on your plate.
Yeah.
It drives me insane how women are expected to be everything. And I know that as someone who was seen as a woman for most of my life and then went over the other side and everyone's like, oh, you know, you could just like concentrate on your career or concentrate on one thing. And I'm like, oh, really? I've never been presented this option before.
Oh, you've definitely got all of the perspectives then, yeah, right? Like, you've seen it from both sides. Well, and actually, there's another one with habits in relation to menstrual cycles as well.
Yes.
So, like, the hormone cycle for testosterone is a daily cycle. So for men who are cisgendered, then basically if they sleep, they wake up fresh, right? Like, they just need to, like, it's like they're a Groundhog Day. They get a new start, the same start every single day. And for women, we actually don't have that. We have the same phases, but our phases take 28 days to go through, or, you know, they're plus or minus, but then we don't have that testosterone cycle during the day. And so that whole, like, get up early because that's when you're at your best energy is completely based on that masculine hormone cycle. And so, like, that's where my burnout first happened when I was in corporate, because there was no nuance around, well, what about during my menstrual part of my phase, or what about during ovulation, or whatever it might be. And so even that, like, trying to have us ascribe to a hormonal pattern that men have a head start on being able to get up at the same time every day. But if we struggle with it, we beat ourselves up. And so where you were talking, Mika, about, you know, 2 or 3 days off your sleep cycle and then it's completely out the window. Well, I didn't even notice that I was able to kind of get up early and do my exercise in the morning and maintain that for 2 to 3 weeks. And it always fell over at exactly the same time in my cycle. I never linked those things because it was that luteal phase of my cycle where I started to be struggle street in the mornings. But that's actually a fairly consistent hormonal pattern for people who menstruate. It's pretty consistent across the board. And so, of course, I'm struggling with it.
You just made me realize that I am pretty good at keeping up with my routines for nearly 3 months at a time. Maybe on my 12-week hormone cycle. I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to tell my endocrinologist all about this.
It's mind-boggling how many pieces of advice or how many routines or even just the habits or the traits, like you talked about at the start, Leslie, that have been labeled as good simply because they belong to the person that the entire society has been built around privileging and preferencing. Like, are men more successful in the workplace because they're more organized, or are they more organized because of their hormones, right? Like, we don't even understand all of the pieces that go into that privilege because we've tried to live for so long in a structure and a society and a system that is built for someone who is not us at all.
Have you considered becoming a man?
Have you tried yoga?
Solves everything.
Solves everything, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I've become like a Shavasana expert. Like that's pretty much my solution when I'm feeling really fatigued.
Yeah. Love it.
If you just get to the gym, you'll feel great.
Oh, jeez.
I mean, I do love me some gym when my health is there for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I had the same with chronic illness, actually. Even just with the gym thing, I had chronic illness. And what I didn't know was when I was going to the gym at certain parts of my cycle, I was actually running on adrenals. I was depleting my system. I was not energizing myself. And the whole process, actually, this brings me back into the book. There are several times where there's no sense of like, listen to your body or make a call based on what you need at that point in time. It's very rigid in that if you skip it, you've failed, or if you
should punish yourself.
Yes, and there's no reward, right? And so I think the reward cycle of the 4 laws is helpful, but also I do see particularly marginalized people then make what I would see as should be pretty much like daily self-care things we're allowed to have regardless are now turned into rewards. Like, how many people say they'll have like the hot chocolate is their reward. You're allowed to have hot chocolate whenever you like. Like, it's not a reward. Like, it's sustenance and it's making you feel good.
Why are you calling me out?
You're allowed a massage as a reward, Mika. But actually, if you go and get a massage every week, you're far more likely to keep that habit up. So stop calling it a reward and actually recognize that that's a need.
That you're a precious person that deserves those things all the time. And when you start actually looking after yourself and telling your body that you're grateful and we're going to treat it with the respect it deserves, that your body might start working with you instead of against you.
Yeah. It's like, what is with this need to constantly compete with ourselves because we're never, ever good enough? It's like, come on now.
Nature is evil and just here to ruin everything.
Oh, nuts.
I don't think it's nature. I don't think it is.
I think
probably not.
We should keep our sympathetic nervous system in constant activation and fight or flight, ready to like, keep
To
going.
sniff and scurry.
Sniff and scurry. Keep it going. Yeah. You know, anxiety, up, hustle. If you stop going, you're going to lose everything. They're coming for you. Run.
Yeah.
Never stop.
Yeah. Absolutely. And there was a statement in the book that the greatest threat to success is not failure, but boredom. But I think that the very people who need to just sit and stare at a blank wall for the longest need it not because of boredom, like it's because of this hustle culture. It's that constant fight or flight. And so there are worse things in the world than being bored and sitting and watching your safety show on TV, despite how it's aged very poorly. Mine might be Friends, right? Right? Like, there's so many of those things where, again, that sense of if you're not up doing something, there's something intrinsically wrong with you. But like what you joked about, Leslie, about being like all about the Shavasana, how many people actually just need to learn how to stop? And need to learn how to deeply rest and need to learn that their desire to sit on the couch and eat nachos today is because they are tired and they are allowed, and it doesn't make them a bad person, and it doesn't make them undisciplined. Like, I could get real crazy about this stuff because it is so fraught, and it creates this environment where we feel like we're measured by our output, right? Like how much work we do, but that is just all back into like working class structures and keeping us tired in a system that is not designed for our success. And then we get told, but you're not successful because you're just not hustling hard enough, or you're not disciplined enough, or you're not this, or you're not that. And really, there's nothing more magical than learning how to rest guilt-free.
Yeah. Because it gets to the point where there's literally nothing you enjoy anymore. And then they're like, oh, why is everyone so depressed? But also, if you sit down and watch TV and eat something nice, you are a bad person and it's all your fault. Every bad thing that happened to you is your fault because you just sit like a couch potato in front of the TV.
And you will gain weight because of your eating habits in front of the TV. It's like, oh, you just can't win. Like there's so many things in this book that again, a book that I like for me, but not for everyone, that can be very shaming, can be very invalidating, and those things can't be ignored when we're interacting with each other based on these things. But all of that said, what is a better way forward when it comes to habits, when it comes to behavior changes, when it comes to self-acceptance? What can we, and people, especially from marginalized communities, keeping intersectionality in mind, how can we approach this differently?
Be compassionate to yourself.
I love that. I think that there's kind of 4 pieces for me. The first one is really understand and unpack the identity you are aiming towards. So is that identity, is it actually the one that's most useful for you? It's the one that you're most aligned with, or is it the one that's going to be most societally accepted? And so really unpacking that piece around identity. The second one is understanding that everything has more nuance than can be tied up in this tiny little book. And so allowing yourself the freedom and the flexibility to take a nuanced approach to how you apply it in your own life. And then knowing yourself as well. So if you know that you are neurodivergent, if you know that you are someone who is not a morning person, if you know that you are going to have a busy and disrupted life because of your children or because of what's going on in the world or whatever it might be, then giving yourself that grace and that space to be able to play with it and to not see every time you don't do your habit as a failure, right? Because failures must be learned from in order for them to be valuable, but instead just see it as a practice, or it's seeing it as something that does not need to be perfect in order to be helpful. And then don't thrust any of the stuff that works for you upon anyone else. And let everyone have their own experience of it, because we all need to be able to apply it in a way that's going to be helpful for ourselves.
Yes.
I love the breaking of the idea that you have to achieve every day. That was a big thing that helped me, in that every day, instead of going, oh, I didn't get anything done today, I started going, what are some things I can be proud of myself for today? I got up and ate food and fed my body. That's an achievement. Rather than pushing all day trying to get something productive done and not eating and dehydrating yourself and still feeling like a failure. Or, just there's always something in the day that if you are motivated by looking after yourself and being compassionate to yourself and your specific situation, I can be proud of getting out of bed. I can be proud of giving my cat a cuddle. If you see the positives in those achievements,
Yeah.
or the validity of those achievements,
Yeah.
for me was a great starting point to letting go of this self-blame
Yeah.
and over-productivity lie.
Yes. Yes. The value that people place on productivity above other things can be very toxic, which is a common theme on this podcast. For me, I think the main way forward, the main lesson to be learned from this is that for a lot of people who haven't done that deep dive into their own core values, that step should not be skipped. You can't just leapfrog over that to go, okay, I am now taking on the identity of a runner. And it's like, okay, you've got plantar fasciitis, but all right, rock and roll. Maybe you should see a physio. And people who will just say like, okay, I want to break this habit, this habit, this habit. I want to create such and such list of habits. But it's like, slow down. Why do you want to do those things? And is the effort that it's going to take to implement those habits going to take you closer to how you want to live your life with meaning and purpose and all of that, however you define meaning and purpose? Or is it just because it seems like a good idea because, I don't know, the Kardashians did it or whoever? Yeah.
That made me realize as well the identity elements that have remained consistent for me and maintainable are those that are based on my core values.
Yeah.
Like wanting to be kind and compassionate, but also boundaried and ethical.
Yeah.
Those are things that I feel like in 50 years' time, I will look back and still feel consistent about.
Yeah.
Whereas, wanting to be rich or a runner or a doctor or things like that, those are all things that will fade or change and can be fluid.
Yeah. And as usual, I mean, this is, with so many of these discussions, we've just barely scratched the surface of all of this, right? There's so many directions we could go with this conversation. There's so many things we could dive more deeply into, but we can kind of wrap it up there. Yeah. But of course, I like to close these conversations with a quote. Do you happen to have one, Tash?
But something that I would love to say is my own thing, which is that your feelings are valid. And I think that sometimes listening to conversations like this, we can get ourselves caught in, oh, I shouldn't feel that way, or I shouldn't have loved that book, or I didn't see that, right? Like all of those pieces. But even with, like Mika, you saying, like finding the success in going and having a shower and eating food in the day, that feeling of accomplishment, that's valid, right? Like
Yes.
No one can take the validity of that feeling away. And so with this book and with habits and with any change that you want to make in your life, let your feelings be something that you pay attention to and that you listen to, because they are absolutely valid, and they are also very guiding as to where maybe you can, where it can lead you. They can guide you to finding that sense of self-identity and values that really lands for you. Because I've also, and this is where working with someone like you is so powerful, Leslie, because I think I've seen people do those values exercises or values exploration, and it's very obvious they're choosing the values that they think are valued the most by society.
Yeah.
Like we can't even identify our values without feeling like they're invalid in some way.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, my big quote is always, your feelings are valid. You're allowed to want what you want. That's allowed.
Yeah, I totally agree.
And delabeling good feelings and bad feelings.
Ridding ourselves of judgment for our feelings.
The needs being met versus unmet feelings helps you to use that as a tool to search for why.
Yeah. Well, there are some other quite powerful words I would like to share as a way of closing. And these come from the legendary James Baldwin. Okay. James Baldwin, of course, being famous writer. I mean, well, he passed away in 1987, but an incredible queer black man who wrote very extensively in response to civil rights issues, and he wrote a lot about masculinity, sexuality, race, and this was at a time where it was very impolite to write about such things. So the words of James Baldwin that I feel are very relevant to this discussion. When one begins to live by habit and by quotation, one has begun to stop living.
Autopilot does suck.
Yes. Beautiful words by James Baldwin. Now, I want to extend a super, super big thanks to Tash.
Thank you so much for letting me be part of this conversation. This has been spectacular.
And I
Thank
think
you.
you're a great person to know and to work with. So if people want to find out more about you and what you do, how can they find you?
I'm on Facebook and Instagram. My website is tashcorbin.com. Everything's labeled on my name, so I'm pretty easy to find. I'm Tash Corbin. Come find me. And also, I love talking to new people and meeting new people. So slide on into my DMs. You're invited. Let me know that you came from the podcast. And send emails through. I love it. I'm someone who is an extrovert and I crave human-to-human connection. So please do reach out and say hello.
Excellent.
Wonderful. And what about us, Leslie? Where can people find out more about you and more about us at the podcast?
Well, to keep up with our shenanigans, the best way to do that is to go to my Instagram. That's at Leslie V Coaching. Leslie with an IE, not an EY. And jump on there. Let us know if there are specific books you want us to talk about. If you want to book a free introductory life coaching consult with me, you can also do that through my Instagram. I mean, my link tree's on there, and you can do that through my website and all of that. Just go to my Instagram, okay?
Yeah. Well, thanks, Leslie.
Right.
Thank you, Tash.
Thank you, Mika.
Thank you. That
Tash.
was really great. Such a cool conversation.
Yeah.
Can I just say it's a very different conversation to talk to two people with a podcast who are talking about intersectionality when my generic or most common experience of being on a podcast is who gave this person a microphone or can we please have a conversation about intersectionality here? I don't really agree with what you're saying. And so yes, it's so lovely to have marginalization addressed up front and to come at it from that one specific angle, because it's normally just that throwaway caveat of and everyone has different lived experiences and blah, 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 blah. But back to this one rigid way of how we're going to do it, everyone.
Yeah.
But why are you shoving marginalized identities in our face?
Yeah.
Making it about yourself.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we can have you on again sometime, maybe. Because, I mean,
Yeah,
there are a
for
lot of the
sure.
big, heavy-hitting books that I'm very keen to get your take on.
Yeah, I'd love to know what you're doing next. This is so good. I
wow.
loved your conversation with Jen Berger. She's so cool. All
right.
right. Well, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right. And thank you to everyone for listening. We will see you in Chapter 7. Bye-bye.